Listeners, welcome to Tales of Abundance. Gentlemen, you are back from your trips. Tell me, John. Let's start in the Rockies. You were skiing. What?
Yeah, I
How
was
was that?
skiing. It was well, for me, if I'm with friends, I can have fun doing almost anything if it's legal and ethical. So like
Yeah.
we go skiing once a year for I think this is our 21st year doing it or 20th year doing it. And the snow in the Rockies has not been great this year. Thankfully, there was about 25 inches dumped right before we got up there, about 2 days early. So we found some fresh powder, but a lot of rocks. But really, it's the time with friends. The time in the car, the time playing games. We played board games and poker. And so it's really just the time with friends. Eating together and just catching up on one another's lives. That's to me always the most valuable part of these things. I love hanging out with friends.
Yeah, my experience is a lot of times the trip is who you take it with, right? And the company.
Yeah.
And if you're with the right people, you have fun anywhere you're at. Well, Anthony, you went to a little different. You went to the Caribbean, or specifically the Bahamas. Tell us about that.
So, we're very fortunate that we're able to stay at a very, very nice resort that's very quiet, away from the maddening crowds. We're a little bit different when we travel. We like to be alone. We really do. It's our time. It's our time. And
By us, you mean you and
just
Jan.
me, yeah, my wife and I, and it's really a time to decompress. Leave the phone in the room, go to the beach, read a book, and just have some conversation, and then really good meals, and just the Bahamas are the Bahamas. They're beautiful. It's beautiful. It's quiet. It's serene. The weather's always great there. You don't have to worry about snow. The ocean, the tide comes in, it goes out, comes back again. It's just a beautiful place, and it's very, very fortunate to be able to do that. It's not that I don't mind being with people, just that sometimes all the coordination, the where do you want to eat, that kind of stuff. But you don't have to make those decisions. Whatever she wants, that's what we go do. I don't.
Do you want to point this out, John, or do you want me to?
Go ahead. I can't
Well,
wait. I have a whole bunch of things to say.
you're with people. Like John's talking about being with a group of people. You're talking about being with one person.
Yeah.
So I think that, but in either case, I think
Well,
you're with people, and it's a
so
lot about
so
who
we
you're
don't,
with.
we don't look at it that. I mean, we are one. We're just one person. We have very similar personalities. We like the same things. Yeah, maybe she likes a different kind of book than I'm going to read, but we went sailing. We love being on the water. We like the same things, and so there's no stress associated with it. Traveling. I don't know what it's like to get to Crested Butte, John, but to get to the Bahamas, you got to go through Atlanta. You got to get on another flight. You got to get down there, and then you got to come back. You got to go through immigration. You got to come back through customs, which you clear customs in the Bahamas with it, so they make it pretty simple. But the to and fro of traveling out of the country is not simple. Well, I shouldn't say that. It's simple, but it's a little crowded. Let's say. When we get to the Bahamas, there's a queue to get in through immigration that's significantly longer than you'd like. So once you're there,
What did you read, Anthony? What did you read?
I'm reading a book. It's called White Noise. It's written in 1985, and it's a little dark to say the least. But I've been reading like 1984 and Animal Farm and things like that, kind of dystopian stuff, because I'm in one of those moods lately. So later on, I'll read Harry
couldn't
Potter or
tell.
something. I don't know. We'll see. I think there's a lot to learn. To get off the subject a little bit, there's a lot to learn from people who wrote long ago and what their view of the future was. Essentially, that's what 1984 was, and that's what this book is about. It's kind of here we are now, but what does the future hold? And so you just draw parallels to it. And, it's a good read. It's a good read. It's a little tough at times, but that's where my head's been at. So
Yeah, so a lot of that's happening in the real world around us. And by the way, I do need to point out your first world problems. All your old friends and family that you grew up around in Boston, and it's cold up there, and there's snow up to their waist. They feel really, really sorry for you that you have these problems getting in and out of the country to go to the
Yeah, I
Bahamas.
know. I was just on the phone with my sister in Connecticut, and she's still digging out up there. So
Yeah, it is tales of abundance. So we're talking, but
yeah, it was an abundant vacation. I can guarantee you that.
yeah. All right. Let's talk about spreading abundance, and we talk about AI a lot. But John, you had the idea today to talk about practical, like, how do people learn AI? Because I do think we talk about it a lot, but there are a lot of people that are intimidated, or they don't know where to start, or I think even most people using it are just using it as a different type of search engine to ask questions to. So, let's jump into that. How do you learn AI in 2026?
For me, I think this was, I use AI all the time in my work in lots of different ways, but really I was watching my wife use AI. And we love travel. We love, planning travel. We've got lots of cool trips planned. And she's got this really cool AI that she built first inside of Gemini, where it's just a custom GPT essentially. And then she actually built a lightweight app that she's running on her computer now it's hooked up to I can't remember which AI she's using on the back end. She built a website essentially, and without having to use a website platform, she built a lightweight, fully functional, full navigation website, log in. She hooked one of the credit card services up to it so it can take credit cards. She has pricing plans for plan a trip for $10 based on your family, your preferences, all your stuff, where you want to go, your budget. And it's really cool. She showed me 5 or 6 trips that she planned just as practices. And this website is gorgeous. I told her, I was a little bit upset because, I built a couple websites for my companies, and my websites are okay, but her websites came out just beautifully done, amazing content. And she did it in a weekend.
Hold on. She built those websites with AI, used Claude Code or something, or whatever code.
She used Cursor, but and she just, I think she just wrote the HTML and then rendered it locally. And then she's got a hosting company ready to take it on so she can host it. It's just, man, things have moved so quickly from even how I was doing web design a year ago.
So, okay, you made a big jump. We went from the standard user using it to replace Google to Amber super user designing apps with it. So where do you start? Because most people aren't starting where Amber is.
I think that's the point, is you start with an AI and you kind of build a custom AI with prompting and instructions in your area of expertise. And then if you're working inside your area of expertise, you can go pretty far, pretty quick. I am fairly sure that in my area of expertise, I'm doing stuff that's cool. But if I tried to do it in marketing where Amber has expertise, I can't get as far as she can get. It's amazing some of the stuff she's doing. And so as I'm talking to people about using AI, it's how do you lean into your strengths? And then as I talk to my kids, I'm trying to help them develop strengths, right? So it's AI and strengths and learning. And so I think that you can use AI in your area of strength to move yourself forward. I think you can also use AI to then learn things where you don't have an area of strength, but you've got to be a little bit careful because, AI can take you down the wrong track on the learning learning front if you're in an area where you have no expertise at all.
But I do think, John, that you can't go as far if it's not your area of expertise, but that's true in life. You can go from no knowledge of something to pretty decent knowledge, almost immediately, right? And yeah, you're not going to be as good as the expert, but why would you expect to be as good as the expert in something?
Well, and you have to remember, you've said this 100 times. It's if you're learning from a person, you can take a grain of salt because that person may be imperfect. AI is also imperfect. In my experience, it's less imperfect than humans, but it's still imperfect. And so I think you just don't want to have the certainty that sometimes comes through in the tone of the AI. And you know me well enough, the two of you know me well enough, that certainty is one of my weaknesses. I come across as certain no matter what I'm talking about, even if I'm guessing. And so I've got to be really careful to say, hey, I don't know about ABC, but here's what I read. And so I try to be a good steward of information in that way. But you guys have joked with me about that over the years. That's a weak point for me.
So, Anthony, what are your thoughts on this?
Not a topic for today.
Where, Anthony? Where? I mean, you're probably you use AI a lot, but you're probably using it less than John and I. Like, what has been beneficial for you in learning how to use it?
So, I always seem to have a contrarian view of things. My
It's the books you're reading.
yeah, my my view is that my view of AI, quote unquote AI, is evolving, and the way I'm approaching using technology is just that. It's a technology with certain capabilities, and does it fit into, and do I need it? Can it help me do something that I'm working on or playing with? And sometimes the answer is yeah, it's great. If I'm doing data analysis or plugging 200 city names into a zip code file to determine what cities to send marketing material to or not, it's great. It's great for that. Ask it, quick. Frankly, I haven't searched on Google for anything. I can't remember the last time I asked Google a question. What's evolving for me is understanding how people are using various AI tools. In the case of quote unquote chat, we'll use that because it's pretty generic, irrespective of using Grok or Gemini or Claude. People are like having conversations. They're not just asking questions. They're having conversations. They're creating personas so that the bot, if you will, knows, kind of where you're coming from. It remembers everything. It remembers it. I recently asked it to do something for me, and it referred me back to something I had done 2 months ago and said, would you like it in this format? And I had forgot about that old format, and it brought it forward for me. It was like, it was like a teacher. Hey, don't you remember in the first semester we taught you all about that? Well, here it is again. So it's just another tool in the toolkit. It's, it is it's like that tool that has the pliers, the screwdriver, the ratchet, all on one thing. It's got Swiss Army knife, if you will, of technology right now. And I'm getting comfortable. Where at the beginning, I was kind of nerve wracked about it. But when John said that his wife created a website, that sparked something in my head. Saying, I wonder how she made that leap from asking it, what's Antarctica like in June versus now I'm going to build a website. That's a pretty huge jump, right? So that's got sparked some interest, and I'm going to bang some keys later today, maybe, and tomorrow, and see how she got there.
Your answer, if I could sum it up, is you just dig in, play with it, and get a little better. Is that pretty much what you're saying?
Yeah. Does it work for you? It's as simple. It's as simple a tool as there is, and it's the most complex tool that there is at the same time. It's the eighth wonder of the world to me. It's just absolutely the eighth wonder of the world. It's just, I'm evolving, and I'm trying not to be pessimistic about where it could lead, and I'm not worried about agents being created on their own and talking to each other and ending the world and all that stuff. But for me, it's a cool tool.
I think giving people practical tips. The first thing I would say is if people don't know how to use it or you're intimidated, the great thing is that you can talk to it in English. A lot of times you push a button and you literally can talk. You don't even have to type. But just go to whatever AI you're using, pick one. I don't really care. And just ask it, how do I use you? And start, like Anthony said, start having a conversation. And the more context you give it, the better the answers. But one of the things I've been using maniacally for weeks now is I write a prompt and then I ask AI, what other questions do you have for me to make this prompt even better? And it asks me questions. And then a lot of times I'll say, do you have more questions? And then I say, okay, now take my original prompt, those questions, and write the perfect prompt for me. And it's unbelievable how good the results are. So my advice to people is just do, like Anthony's saying, do it, but just the practical way is ask it
Yeah.
what to do. If you want, you can create a training program. Just go in AI and say, hey, I don't know how to use AI. Can you create a 30-day, or I don't care, 7-day, 30-day, 365-day, whatever you want, training program? I want to spend 10 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day, an hour a day. And I would even tell it more. I'd tell it how I learn, and I'm visual, or I'm audit, or I learn by doing, or whatever, right?
And Randy, I think that's the thing that people, I think it may not be obvious listening to you. You do a great job of like communicating for clarity with the AI. Like I've watched you prompt and you've watched me prompt, right? So so a couple of things that aren't obvious at this point is that we try to help each other by, like, I'll watch Randy prompt and I'll learn a bunch of stuff about how to get better at prompting. I think you have the same thing when you watch me do that. And Randy will prompt and then prompt again and then prompt again. And the prompts are like, ask the question, ask it to make the question better, ask if it's totally clear, ask what's unclear, all in separate prompts if necessary. And so that level of communication for clarity is kind of the opposite of the hand waving we're doing right now with you. And so it wouldn't be totally obvious. And I think that's maybe the thing we should call out to people is it takes a little more patience. And so while it might take, 10 minutes instead of a single prompt with Google from a year ago, eventually you become much better at prompting, and eventually the information and things it unlocks for you are so much greater that it saves you huge amounts of time. But I want to make sure that what's not obvious we kind of call out clearly.
Right. Okay. All right. Bottom line, jump in. Whatever level you're at, learn more. We are going to go to break, and when we get back, we are going to dig into John's changing a belief system. And I think this is pretty exciting, and so we're going to rip John open and pick on him a little bit. But we'll be back after the break.
Here at Tales of Abundance, we know that fitness is just as important as money or milestones. It's one of our key 5 F's for lots of us. Taking care of my body while I build my life is one of the more time-consuming and difficult goals to chase. That's why we're partnering with AG1. It's a daily drinkable habit. Less than a minute, that's formulated with 75 plus vitamins and nutrients and designed to support energy, digestion, and immune defense. It even has a few grams of protein that we're all chasing these days. And if you want to try it with our affiliate link, you'll also receive a free AG1 flavor sampler, plus vitamin D3 plus K2 with your welcome kit when you first subscribe, a $72 value. Go to shop.drinkag1.com/tales.
Listeners, welcome back from the break. And as I mentioned, we are going to dig into changing a belief system. I think this is a great topic. And John had mentioned to Anthony and I and a group of people not long ago about how he was changing his belief system about marketing, which is, John, just tell us how you got there. Like, what's the origin of this, and why did you start thinking about it? And yeah,
I'm just watching. I've got this amazing thing where Dustin Williams, who's an MD, myself, I'm a doctor of social work, have written this amazing set of clinical protocols to reverse type 2 diabetes. And we are terrible I am terrible at marketing. Like there are people out there who have just far inferior approaches to clinical efficiency or efficacy. Like we're really changing people's lives, and it's like the best kept secret in the world. It's terrible. And what I realize is that I have a belief system around marketing, and really it's about self-promotion even. I hear people that go through self-promotion, and I've even had feedback where someone's like, hey, you were overconfident in what you said. And I never want to give misinformation. And so when someone's like, you're overconfident in what you said, or I took it to mean something other than what you said it meant. And like, I don't ever want to mislead people. And what that's led me to is I don't want to actually speak from a loud podium lest someone get, a misunderstanding. And I need to just kind of let go of that and make sure that I'm being really clean in my message. And that if people take something away from that's not what I'm intending to be said and I'm not clearly saying, I can keep trying to clean up my message, but it shouldn't stop me from marketing.
So this is, and by the way, if you're a listener, it may not be a marketing thing, right? It could just be imposter syndrome, or you're not smart enough, you're not strong enough, you're born in the wrong place. I mean, who knows what the belief system is? But, John, we've talked about beliefs a lot. I think most people go through life and probably don't really change any beliefs unless something, horrible or traumatic happens in most cases. So this is not a light lift. This is a big lift. What is the belief system that you would like to have? Like, what is the healthy belief that you're shooting toward?
Yeah, I think that's, I'm in search of, right? Like, that's the thing I'm in search of right now is like, I'm in search of evidence. And the way that I do this is I act in a certain way and look for evidence that marketing can be done without any type of, and I'm still searching for this, Randy, so it's a great question. But I'm trying to find a way that I can feel really resolved in that my marketing is doing great things for the world.
Okay. Maybe I started with the wrong question. Let's go back to why don't you like marketing? Let's start
I don't
there.
know that I don't like it. I'm married to a great marketer.
Okay, so why don't you market, or why is it a fear? I don't think
I think it's the
fear in
self-promotion. I hear people that are self-promotional, and when the self-promotion is misguided, and I don't appreciate it. And I think what I do is I find the gaps. And I'll give you a great example of a person I think is great at marketing and is appropriately self-promotional, but I still sometimes my own inner stuff rails against it, is Tony Robbins. I think Tony Robbins is a really good marketer. I like his stuff. And his stuff is really good, and like for 90-something% of what he does, I'm making up the percentages, right? But like there's some part of it where he talks about his stuff treating depression and anxiety, and it's probably true that some of what he can do can treat some parts of depression and some types of anxiety, but I have a belief that a therapist should be involved in assessing that before trying something that's non-therapeutic in nature, and I think Tony Robbins will be the first to tell you he's non-therapeutic. And I do agree that his stuff can treat some subclinical and perhaps even some clinical depression and anxiety. I don't know the science behind it. I'm sure he has a lot of science there. But my brain goes straight to, whoa, 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 whoa. Like when you deal with that, you could do damage. And when you could do damage, you should get a professional involved first. Like that's my belief system.
Is this almost like a fear of our amygdala, right, and looking for fear and danger? Is that mostly where this is seated, you think?
I don't know about mostly. There's certainly a part of that. My first executive coaching experience I ever had, I had someone dive into clinically therapeutic issues, and years later when I got into therapy, it was clear that that person had gone in and done something therapeutically damaging. Like there was no question about that. And so I became really sensitized to that. Like, playing in areas where you don't belong can be damaging to people, and I don't want to do damage. I don't jump into an operating room and do surgery. I've never been trained in surgery. I don't prescribe medicine. I've never been trained in medicine. And so I think, I don't want to harm people. And so I think that some marketing, I wouldn't say most marketing, I would say that some marketing does harm, and I don't want to do harm.
So let me ask you another question, and I don't know if you've thought about this. I asked you before this if it was sales and marketing or just marketing, and you said, no, I'm good with sales. Wouldn't you agree that everything you just said about marketing also applies to sales? Like some salespeople do the same thing?
Yeah, without a doubt. I think this is about me, right? And I don't mean that like in a narcissistic way. I mean like when I'm one-on-one selling with someone, I can see how they're responding, and if there's a miscommunication, I feel like I can clean it up.
Okay.
Right? In marketing, I think sometimes it's one-to-many, and it's difficult to clean it up.
So you're saying, if I'm understanding right, if it's a sales situation, they say something and you can give them clarity on the spot. If it's marketing, you send it out there, somebody misunderstands, and they are just believing something. You would never even know that they're believing something that's inaccurate.
I think that's a part of it. And I think that some part of the belief system I need to shift is like, I can't own that. Like what I can own is putting out real information. What I can own is being factual and not ambiguous. And then what someone receiving that's on them to make sure that they understand it correctly. But again, we're doing this live and in public, so we're gonna get people like probably writing and telling me like, John, you're seeing it wrong, and like I'll take that feedback, like I'll listen to how, because I'm just trying to do something that's good for the world without doing damage. And you know, some people have said, well, hey, John, you're gonna crack a few eggs if you want to make an omelet, and you're gonna upset some people, and I think, you know, if I upset some people because of, you know, them having a filter that receives it because of their stuff, I think I'm okay with that, maybe. But I don't want to be, I want to be thoughtful so that I'm doing the best I possibly can.
But you also want to be effective. You know that, you know, so you've got to, let's dial it back a little bit. And John, if I get this wrong, you know, jump in. But this all kind of the beginning of this belief system change was caused by trauma. And the trauma was all the hard work you did on a particular business to get it off the ground, you know, put a message out there, create the persona for the business that you wanted, didn't, you know, it didn't work in the sense of drawing. You built a better mousetrap and no one came to buy it. And so that was traumatic for you. And you had to step back.
Was or is?
Go ahead. Say that again.
I said was or is.
Yeah, well, yeah.
I said was or
it
is.
And so you decided to change, and you took some steps that I'll recount a little bit. You know, you turned to me. Number one, we talked a lot, but you also got, you know, external third-party help. You reached out. Now, whether that third-party help is going to work out or not, still to be determined. But you went out and you sought other viewpoints. And you know, we're using marketing as the basis of belief change in this particular case. But it took a lot for you to put your ego aside and recognize that all that work you did, I mean, you did a tremendous amount of work positioning the company, and it's not getting you the results you need. And any kind of beliefs that you have, no matter what it is, apparently it's going to take some kind of seminal event to get someone to consider the change and then go ahead with it, go ahead with beginning the change. And you're in the middle of a journey. And I don't think it's trivial to say that it's very, very uncommon for people to change their belief system in anything. And so what I wanted to ask you was to touch on that from a, you know, with your background, how people should, you know, validate their existing belief, and if it's not valid or they feel like it needs to be adjusted, what are the steps they have to take to begin the journey? Because it is a journey.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we talk about with our patients is like a readiness for change, right? Like, are you committed to changing? And, you know, I can think of just a handful of major belief systems as an adult that I've rewired, and it has taken immense amounts of effort. And generally, it's been, for me, the motivating factor has been pain, right? And I think that there's all kinds of things that motivate people. So there's pain physically, pain emotionally, there's fear of something that happens in the future, generally, you know, fear of pain happening in the future. And then I think you can also change as a result of like overwhelming pleasure. Like people do make changes as a result of like desired pleasure or pleasure right now. And so those things all can cause changes. I think for this big belief system change, the things in my life have been around just the emotional pain of not getting to where I want to go, you know. And so one of those belief systems early in my adult life was around my relationship with money and my need for approval of other adults. Those are two things that I had to really address from a belief system perspective. And then you asked about the process to get there. I took a cognitive behavioral approach, which was, you know, offer myself a second point of view that was different than the existing point of view, and then act as if the second point of view was true. And then I started paying attention for evidence that it was indeed true. And so that was the process, right? So choose a second belief system, which I'm still working on clearly today for marketing. You guys heard me prevaricating about that. Like, I'm not quite sure what it is. And then once that happens, starting to behave in a way that as if that were belief system were true, so I can find evidence that it is true. And then I can go back and adjust that belief system if it's not working quite the way that I want. I can make adjustments to it and then keep going through that cycle of finding evidence to reinforce a new belief system over time.
And I think in the spirit of our mission to create abundance, you were locked into a belief system that was blocking you from creating that abundance to achieve the goals. And for certain,
Probably still locked in there.
yeah, I know.
Probably still am locked there.
Well, tied to it, but at least you've loosened the reins a little bit and letting the horse run. And you have a direction. You might shift it a little bit, but I think back to the original kind of issue of beliefs, preventing abundance. When you're locked into a belief, and we could talk about, politics, money, your desire for pleasure and immediate gratification. If you have certain beliefs around that and you're not constantly evaluating them, you're not taking advantage of the opportunity to create abundance. Because staying locked on anything for a significant period of time that isn't spiritual or tied to your religion and so forth is really blocking. It's like putting blinders on that horse I just referenced. You're not seeing the opportunities that are around you. You're looking straight ahead and you're missing out on the tweaks that can help you get more out of life, whether it's more fitness, more fun, more money, more faith, more friends, more family, and so on. So I think it's really something people should be thinking more about, not less about. What are my blinders? What set of blinders do I have on around family, around money, and so on and so forth?
Well,
So, John,
core to me, oh, sorry, I was going to make one comment, Randy, about that. I've got people around me, Anthony. Every time I've made this type of change, I've had a small group of people around me that I've been able to share this with in a really safe environment to get support in making those changes. And that even this go around has been scary and vulnerable and hard and necessary. And so like and I'm really trying to lean into some people and trying to get people to lean in more with me. I mean, you and I have had a couple, greater than 60-minute conversations around this, and you're not the only one. And so I think the next step for me, I just wrote down, I might need to bring a couple of you together so that you guys can kind of hold me accountable as a group. So I'm not like, making it easy on myself by telling you something and I'm telling somebody else something different. Or like, I think I need to get a little bit of a group accountability here. So I just made a note of that.
One of the things that I keep thinking about is I'd love to give credit to the proper person, but that it's much easier to convince people of something than it is to change their mind or convince them that they were lied to, right? And if you just look around you in society, this is so true. People pick a political party for whatever reason, and then usually they just stay there their whole life, right? Or look at all the things around food and medicine. New science will come out that disproves something that we've thought, and yet it just stays in society. And even though people hear they've been lied to, whether it's for 5 years or 50 years, they get the new evidence and they're just really, really slow. Like this is hard. Like I don't know that everybody knows it's hard, but it's really, really hard to just, I asked you what the new belief system is, but I think unless you're aware of what's wrong on the back end, it's really, really hard to adopt that, right?
And Randy, you said something I want to parse out here for a second for my own benefit, but also maybe for the benefit of the listener. You talked about people being lied to, and then that becomes arguable. Like, was I lied to? Was I not lied to? You're arguing about a third person's intent. No one can really know. And all of that is noise. Like at the end of the day, if there's new data and the new data is good data, I believe like part of my identity is as a scientist, which means that I have strong convictions that are loosely held. when new science comes about, I want to be able to update my belief systems based on new evidence. And I want to understand the strength or weakness of that new evidence so that I can appropriately change my perspective. But I do think a lot of people, when they make a decision, it's very hard to uproot someone from a decision. That's kind of well known. And I think it's important to, for me, this is now what's important to me, is that I want to encourage people to have strong convictions loosely held, so that when they get new, like I went to a friend of mine and I said, hey, look, my recollection of our conversation was different than what you think it was, and we happened to have a transcript from an AI recorder. We went back to the transcript, and his recollection of the conversation was right on. Mine was off, and so rather than getting really upset and bent out of shape about it, I took that data and reacted to the data versus my, in this case, incorrect recollection.
And I think a lot of people aren't capable of doing that, or I don't know about not capable, but they don't, because they do get so tied into an opinion. And one of my little pet peeves is when I hear people criticizing a politician anytime they change anything, right? And these are the people making it. It's like if you get on an airplane and there's a flight plan and all of a sudden there's a massive storm in the middle, the pilot has new information. I would like them to change the flight plan. And I feel the same way, whether it's a politician, a business leader, or somebody in a family, right? So but it's
again, nuance matters, right?
Yeah,
If somebody says one.
Go ahead, John.
Go ahead, Anthony. I was going to say, if someone says something to one person, they say story A, then they tell story B, then they tell story A, then they tell story. Like, I can understand that frustration. But if someone said story A 20 years ago, and in story B, we use it in medicine all the time. Like sulfonylureas were, we thought, a really great drug to treat diabetes years ago, and we now know that it actually makes the problem worse, not better. But that is, on a relative basis, newer science. And so there's a difference between someone who changes their story in the minute to get what they want and someone who's using new information and has changed their mind. And I think sometimes we've got to be clear about which, if it's changing your mind because there's new data, I think that deserves some conversation.
What was I going to say? I was going to say that I think beliefs are mostly unconscious. That people aren't really aware. I mean, they obviously developed the belief, but now it's buried. And if you really press someone on a touchy subject, right? John, you said it's really hard to get them to move. Randy, you said it's really hard to get them to move. One of the reasons is they don't believe that they believe that, right? And politics is a good example. There's fights every day about diet, this diet versus that diet, this methodology versus that methodology, this exercise regimen versus that one. People don't even realize they have a belief system, a belief system about a particular subject or thing. And that's the first part that you have to break through, right? John and I have been doing marketing forever. I'm not sure we ever thought of it as a belief system. We thought of it as, we got $1 million, we got to go spend it and get customers. Do we have a belief system around it? No, we had a methodology to spend that money. We had tactics that we were comfortable and familiar with, but was there a belief system that said, the difference between marketing as advertising and marketing as value creation is a huge difference, right? So that's where we're thinking. That's where we're thinking about spending our dollars now. Is how do we create value, not how do we, get in front of more people. So it's just a. I think it's a really difficult subject, and particularly in personal lives. When you're talking about personal things, money and politics, and the way where you're going to live, and who you want to be around, those things are hard to coordinate among a family or two people, because so much of your beliefs are kind of buried underneath a bunch of other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So
go ahead, Randy.
Go ahead, John.
I was just going to say, I think that's, for me, in this marketing one, Like there are people that in the world that are willing to say and do things in marketing that I'm not today willing to say or do around doing harm. And so that means I have to, resolve my kind of my ethics and my value system with also being able to be a great marketer around that. And so part of that is finding great marketers, that do that. I know many, and understanding what their belief systems are and trying to emulate those, because I do believe there are lots of marketers that have very high ethics and very high value systems that don't do damage. I just need to go figure out what those belief systems are and create my own, and then start that flywheel. It took me a couple of years to get through the other times when I've kind of really rewritten these belief systems. So I'm giving myself the grace to do it well and do it quickly, but not unreasonably fast.
My wife hates this phrase, but let's double click on something you said. I want to know the difference or the distinction between values and beliefs, because I see them as very different things. Your value of not, I see the value of not wanting to harm anyone. Mm-hmm. But what's the difference between values and beliefs to you?
So a value system is generally something that you would rather walk away from everything else to maintain your value, whereas a belief system is driving something, some behavior that you may not be conscious of and certainly may not be in line with your values. And one of the ones that I changed early in my life is that I had a belief system that money was the foundation for security in my life. And what I learned was that money and security were not synonymous at all. I met lots of people who had lots of money and didn't have any type of emotional security or financial security. And I've met people that didn't have a lot of money that had economic security because they just didn't need a lot. And they had lots of emotional security for reasons having nothing to do with money. And so I had conflated the two in a belief system that had nothing to do with my values. And so now I think I'm playing a little bit of a semantic game, and you could make an argument, well, that was your value system, you were changing it. I don't think that's the important point. I think the important point is that, like, once you understand your values, those are things that are immovable, and belief systems, in my mind at least, can be movable.
Yeah, it's interesting. Interesting where the belief came from, right? So when you talked about believing that money was the route to security and so forth, I think we all, many of us anyway, of the, 70s, 80s, and 90s, were operating under the belief system that, we had the American dream. We needed to amass as much of a fortune as possible, have a better life than the previous generation, and that was going to lead to happiness and joy and nirvana and whatever. And we learned the hard way how untrue that was. But the belief system was, I guess, I'm going to use the word thrust upon us by the environment that we were born into. And I think that's something else
so
you've got to be conscious of, is that sometimes your belief system is environmental.
Marketers oftentimes are trying to influence our belief systems in ways that I think are, sometimes not awesome. And so now you're back into my core belief system that I don't want to do that to people, because I do believe that, a lot of marketers are influencing people in ways that is not a way that I would want to influence people.
I think, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you feel it, a lot of them are manipulative, correct?
Yeah, the definition of manipulation that I've used for years is that when I have information you don't have that you could have, and I use that information against you, that's the foundation of manipulation. So I heard that definition somewhere once. It makes sense to me. And so if a marketer knows more about my psychology and uses that against me in a way that is, leveraged, I find that to be not awesome.
Okay. So I want to go to the logic. And by the way, I also want to acknowledge that the logic has almost nothing to do with solving this issue, right? It really is a belief, and it's things that are probably subconscious. But I do want to go to the logic, because I'm sure listeners are thinking, well, if you have this great product, right? You have Prasina, you can help people with diabetes, which is a huge mission for you. Well, would you rather help millions of people or 10 people, right? And obviously marketing is a big way of doing that. But, and the question I guess I'm going to ask you: would you choose if you had a? Would you rather serve 1 million people but have 100,000 of them feel pissed off, or would you rather help 100,000 people and have none of them pissed off?
Yeah, I think my question would be why does that false dichotomy exist? Why can't I help 900,000 people and have none of them pissed off? Like, how do I thread the needle?
I think that's impossible. That's my
Maybe.
opinion, but I love the question. By the way, I think it's an amazing question, and I'm being exaggerating where I say you have to piss off 100,000. But my real point is, if your goal is not to piss off anybody and you want to help millions of people, I don't know that it doesn't matter if you're Christ himself, you piss off certain people, right?
I think that's a part of my belief system I got to get over, Randy. I think you just put your thumb on exactly the thing that I've got to wrestle with, which is like, how do I let people have enough agency to dislike my message and be okay with that?
Oh.
Like that has to be a part of any kind of adult functional relationship with someone in the professional sphere. And so that's part of what I'm wrestling with here.
Yeah. I mean,
For sure.
Again, sticking with the logic, I think that if you are honest and you are telling people things that you think are for their benefit, or you're letting them choose ultimately if it's for their benefit, then nobody's forcing them to click or give you a credit card or whatever, right? And you're doing that in an honest, ethical, straightforward manner, it's the most anybody can ask, right?
But if I'm also getting feedback that my level of certainty causes some people to overestimate what I'm saying, then I think I also have a responsibility to be very deliberate in choosing my words and my level of certainty so that I can kind of maintain my own standard of ethics.
I also
That's a
think
weakness
you,
that I have.
also think you can be super authentic and lean into people and tell them, hey, I've got a concern about this, so please understand, or whatever that is. And you can put a Dr. John disclaimer at the beginning, right? And I think not only that, it probably is more effective for marketing if you actually do tell them, here's my concern about this, but heartfelt, I want to change the world. Anyway, I'm into the logic, which is really not what this is about.
I think that's right. I think you've hit on a couple things here that are important for me to consider as I go through it, for sure.
John, you're taking on
done.
one of the most difficult problems. The customer, if you will, the end customer, has been lied to, cheated, disabused, unfairly charged for things. You could come at this with the greatest intent, and you will come at it with the greatest intent. Because you have a skeptical audience, someone in that audience isn't going to buy it and isn't going to like it. And I think you need to get over that. Just get over that part.
I agree with that, as long as I can look at what I said as being,
Yeah.
So let's go to what have you tried, what's worked, and it could be in the past, right? You talked about changing a belief system earlier and giving yourself new evidence and having a new model and all that, but what are things, and we've talked about this, right? I know one of your big things is journaling, but what other things have you done that have worked, and how do people change belief systems?
Yeah, I think for me it really is about journaling and then getting a group of experts around me that can help. And so that group of experts includes people that are experts at the behavior change, which I happen to work with, which is great, and then experts in the field marketing, which I have to have around me, which is great. And then having these conversations, like I think it's, fair for the listener to hear, like this conversation we're having together on a podcast isn't that different than one we would have in a group of our peers, where we'd have this conversation, we would dive in, and it's, like I'm taking notes as we're going here, and I'm being introspective. It's like, crap, I got to put that into my journal. I got to think some more about that. I got to come back to these guys with some answers about how I'm going to actually think through this. And I expect that you guys are going to challenge me on this on Thursday when we get together again. Like, so I have some accountability to that too. And so it's like, who are the 3 to 12 people in my life that can really help me make this shift, and they're going to be willing to stick with me throughout the period that it's going to take, because this is going to be a 12-month process for a deeply rooted system like this for me. There are some people that I've helped change belief systems faster. There are some people that may have gone slower, but like I know myself well enough to know like this is going to be a process, and my hope is it takes me through a hockey stick of change.
Have you considered using AI as a partner in this?
Oh, I do. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. Yeah.
I was
think there's
just
something
thinking
you and I
if you
talked about, like
asked it,
AI. Yeah,
if
there's
you
AI
asked it to create a
clones.
30-day program for you to help you overcome it, right? I'd be curious what it would come up with.
Yeah, I think there's a coaching part of it. I think there's a part of this that might be therapeutic, which I'd want to get, the right people involved in that case. And so,
Yeah.
I'm gonna solve this one the right way for sure. Like I'm really committed to making sure this is a long term, because I think this problem is showing up here, but I don't think it's limited. I don't think I don't think this is the only place it's symptomatic in my life.
Well, that's the pesky thing about beliefs, right? We have beliefs and they impact us all kinds of ways that we never,
But there's probably something about my need to feel certainty, back to that need for approval, where I feel a need to speak with a level of authority that people take as being more authority than is deserved, which is balanced with the fact that I learn about a lot of things, and I do know a lot about a lot of things, and so so there's some other thing going on with me that I've got to dig into to get better at being, the person I want to be.
John, this might be off. I'm just going to throw this out there. But in one of the early podcast episodes, right, when it was just me and you told a story about when you were a kid with stepbrothers and sisters that
Yeah.
told you things that were inaccurate. Is that where a lot of this stems from?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is possible, right? Because that was an environment where I very much wanted to be liked, and I very much wasn't accepted in the way that I wanted, and that had a long-term effect, as you know.
Yeah.
And so, and now I have varying relationships with all those people, right? Including kids that I grew up with on the street. And so, no, I think that's a fair assessment. And so, yeah.
It's this is what makes it so hard, right? I know myself in fighting with beliefs is part of it for me is just figuring out where that came from, right? And like I didn't choose it. I didn't, when I have very much overcome my thought process about money and poor rich people being bad and all that. And that was that took me decades probably. Right? But a lot of it is I had to go back and really understand where it came from, acknowledge it wasn't a decision I made. It was just my subconscious, like Anthony said earlier, and it was there, and then figuring out how to solve it was a whole nother problem on top of that. So,
Yeah.
Anthony, we mentioned journaling. John mentioned his other workflow. Anything you've done to create new beliefs?
I look at my life trifurcated, right? It's the youthful time in my life, the career segment, and then the entrepreneurial and the last season of my life here, and I'm listening to people a lot more now than I ever did. I used to listen to a particular person in a particular moment to to create a belief system in the context of what that person or that boss wanted me to have. But now I find myself being far more open-minded to listen to a lot of different people and take, criticism, if you will, or really want to understand, where they're coming from and why. And boy, that might be something I want to think about. So I think with age, things change. I can see that. I do a little bit of journaling, more gratitude journaling than anything else. But paying attention to what's going on around me and being really open-minded, it's a maturation process. And I can understand why I behaved the way I behaved back in the day, if you will. And I counsel the younger generation that I'm in contact with, mostly my kids and my nieces and nephews, by sending them particular articles or asking them questions and things like that, hoping that they'll be more open-minded than I was, or less myopic than I was. I think that was probably one of my biggest failures coming through the career path that I came through, very myopic about my thinking. So it's more about maturation and opening my eyes, and hopefully we can counsel people in a way that raises the consciousness of their particular belief and gives them an opportunity to assess it, because a belief system is an abundance blocker, and we're all about creating abundance. So, how do you leverage your belief? Either take advantage of it in a way that creates abundance, or change it however radically or slightly in order to, create abundance in one of our 5 F's. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's how I feel.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking, John, you're the one that turned me on to journaling, and I definitely, the journal that you created has I release and I choose, and sometimes I had to write the exact same thing for a month or 2 months. I think one time I wrote the exact same thing for almost a year, right? And I just
Yeah, I
kept
was gonna say
writing it.
it's 4 or 5 months for me when I'm changing beliefs, maybe longer. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So that's a long, slow process. I have changed a couple of belief systems quickly. Um, I've had some psychedelic experiences that changed it in a night. I mean, literally, I don't know how it rewires the brain. I don't understand it, but somehow it did. And the other thing I've noticed when I've gone to Tony Robbins events that I've had belief systems that have changed really, really quickly in whatever it is that he's doing. So, I mean, I've seen amazing things there, and I'm sure there's other things as well. So, all right, let's put a bow on this thing. Any final thoughts? And in particular, John, I'm curious takeaways from you. Anthony, did we lose Anthony? I'm gonna have Anthony go first so you can think about that. But Anthony, did we lose you? Okay, we lost Anthony, I think. So
Yeah, for me, I think I took 5 or 6 bullet points here about specific actions I want to take to kind of speed up the process of identification of where to move the belief system that I want to develop, and then what actions I can take to reinforce it or vet that. And so that's, and then I took a couple things, from my therapy 20 years ago that I want to go think through and see, like, is it worth me going back and opening that door to see if that's a part of what we're doing too. So that was a couple of the really helpful things I took from today.
cool. Yeah, for me, I think it's thinking again about how hard it is, right? Because I tend to be a just do it and go in and do a lot of things through sheer force of will. But even for somebody like me, that's really challenging, and I think it's really hard for most people to do. So
Yeah, force of will is generally not a good answer in these things. That's
yeah, but
I know
so
for me, but yeah.
yeah. So for me, it's just telling listeners, like, man, if you're struggling with something, take a week, take a month, take 5 years, but just work on it and realize it is a big journey if you're brave enough to take it on. And John, I appreciate you being brave enough not only to take this on and do this, but to be open about it, in this setting. I think that's really
A little
great.
scary, I got to admit, little scary,
Yeah.
but that's all right.
Yeah, and hopefully it's helping people, right? So yeah, it's great. Listeners, as always, we appreciate your support. Download, tell your friends, whatever it is. Follow us on social media. Go to the website, talesofabundance.com, and everybody have an abundant day.
Thanks, Randy.
All right. Listen and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Click follow for more content like this, or go to talesofabundance.com to join our community and get free tools.